The latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
This is Strat News Global. I'm Amitabh Revi, and we're discussing Afghan President Ashraf Ghani and the head of the National Reconciliation Committee, the chairman, Dr. Abdullah Abdullah's visit to the White House and to the US, in fact. And we've got two extremely experienced and knowledgeable guests with us. Dr. Turek Farhadi, who's been an ex-advisor to both President Ghani and President Karzai. He's worked in the financial world a lot, in the IMF, in the World Bank, in the United Nations as well. Dr. Farhadi is doing back-to-back interviews now because of the subject. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Farhadi.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Amitabh.
A pleasure. And from the capital, Ambassador Vivek Karju needs no introduction to our viewers here in India and South Asia, an ex-ambassador to Afghanistan, former Secretary of the Ministry of External Affairs as well. Ambassador Karju, good to see you again, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Our pleasure. Before I get your comments and views on what's really happening, the situation in Afghanistan, around the region, let's just play out a small excerpt of what President Ghani said after his meeting at the White House with President Biden, when he said that the US is assuring Afghanistan that it is still supporting it.
Clearly articulate that the US Embassy in Afghanistan will continue its functioning. That support of over $3 billion for the Afghan security and defense forces has been requested. That the program of record in terms of delivery of certain material, like helicopters, will proceed on accelerated schedule.
Ambassador Karju, you've seen all the comments that were made post that visit. He looked tired. I don't know whether it's just jet lag or the fact that he's extremely beleaguered. In one of his comments, in fact, he also, if I'm not wrong, mistakenly quoted, he said it's Bernard Shaw when he meant Mark Twain. He said, don't put out our obituaries before we are dead, kind of thing. But what's your take on why both of them were called to the White House? And was it just a photo opportunity, just to give them confidence?
Permit me to place this in the perspective that I see. I think some months ago, the Biden administration had come to the conclusion that the Taliban were willing for talks, and that is the time when Blinken's letter was leaked. And the pathway was that there will be negotiations for an interim government, a ceasefire, and the third step was that thereafter the Taliban and the Kabul elite will discuss about the future political system of Afghanistan. Once the Americans decided to withdraw and announced a date, then I think the scenario changed a bit and the Taliban started dragging their feet. Now, my own impression
dragging their feet on the negotiating table, not
on the negotiation, on this plan. Yeah. Because at that stage, Blinken's letter to Ghani was so harsh that it seemed to, it was quite obvious that they thought that the real problem didn't lie with the Taliban, it lay in Kabul, and that they needed to bring the Kabul elite together, and perhaps Ghani was not the right person. So if there is an interim administration, there needs to be someone else to head it. That was at that stage, I think that was the American appreciation. But things have changed because the Taliban have shown a great reluctance to follow this plan. Now we can discuss why they've shown it. One of the reasons could be that the Taliban think, as the Pakistanis are saying, as Imran Khan recently said, that they think that they won. But it is also possible that the Pakistanis are advising the Taliban to gain as much military advantage as they can, and then at some stage start a negotiating process and show a willingness for a unity government. Now, at this stage, the Americans are putting pressure on the Taliban and Pakistan, because at the UNSC briefing sometime back, I think the threat they were holding out to the Pakistanis and the Taliban was that if you think that you will achieve a military victory, please understand that that will not be accepted, that will not legitimize you. And legitimacy is important because the Pakistanis know full well that a government which is not legitimized will go back to the 1990s, and Ghani may still retain the Kabul seat, just as Rabbani retained the UN seat, just as Rabbani retained the UN seat. So I think the Americans are playing a two-track thing. On the one hand, they're putting pressure on Kabul to come together. That is why Ghani was clearly not invited alone. They didn't want him to have all the spotlight. They got Abdullah with him, so that the clear signal is that Kabul should come together. And at the same time, they are showing the Taliban that, look, even if we withdraw, it doesn't mean that we are going to abandon them. So there is a game in play, and there are imponderables. And Tariq may be in a better position to say what is going to be the outcome of this game. But I see this game in play, and my experience of Afghanistan has taught me that one should be prepared for surprises at any time.
Absolutely. Dr. Fadi, President Ghani, again, he brought up, this is Afghanistan's 1861 moment. He's talking about Lincoln and Herman, and how Lincoln had gone into Washington and forged that unity. So that's one card that the Americans are probably telling the Afghan politicians to play. But like the ambassador saying, how do you see this panning out?
Thank you for inviting me again. I think, as the ambassador exposed, very well explained, now the outcome of this game is lose-lose, almost for everyone. It's lose-lose for the United States, for Afghanistan, for Afghanistan's neighbors, Pakistan included. And the origin of this new change comes from the fact that President Biden decided to leave without conditions. So basically, he had reports that Ashraf Ghani has postponed the peace process. It was visible to people who were watching the news on Afghanistan that he postponed the peace process, and he was trying to postpone the whole issue of transitional government and proposed elections and new things every day, a new gimmick. But from inside, they also had information that, in fact, President Ghani doesn't believe in peace with Taliban. He says it, but himself and his closest associates still don't believe that they can co-govern with Taliban. And vice versa, the Taliban also know that they cannot co-govern with President Ghani. And they see him as a weak leader, and not a leader for the Pashtun community, not a leader for Afghanistan, and not a leader who could bring everybody together in Afghanistan. And today, the only thing that President Ghani had was that he was giving the impression to the region and to Afghan politicians that he is a darling of Washington, D.C. Well, he may have been a darling of Washington, D.C., but Washington, D.C. sometimes drops darlings. The history is harsh, and now he's no more. He had wanted this trip in the past 2 decades. Every time a new Afghan president wanted to go to Washington, D.C., and the same aircraft was provided, for their delegation to go. He had to rent a private aircraft from Comair at the rate of $25,000 an hour to 14 hours journey. The plane had to wait for 2 days and then come back. Just the travel cost more than $600,000. The Americans let them pay for their hotel bill. In the past, the hotel bill was paid by the Americans. At the airport, no one of consequent rank was there to greet them. And when they went to the White House, Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Ghani were the only two people from the delegation that were not body searched. Everybody else was body searched, which was also sort of a signal. And the foreign minister of Afghanistan was not allowed in the meeting. The Kabul Foreign Ministry says that because he had a positive corona test, okay, but in that case, the White House could have moved the meeting in the Rose Garden and just have the meeting in open air, but they didn't feel it was important to have him in the room either. So the signals here were that yes, we receive you, you wanted to come. We have worked together for 2 decades, but it's not the same. It's like a couple that is now estranged. And the same way, when Dr. Ghani went to Washington, D.C., he didn't offer anything new on how and what he is changing in order to arrive at peace in Afghanistan. He went saying the same things he had been saying for the last several months. That we have to fight, we are against a big menace here. Yes, we are. But what was the new thing? I mean, all the way to Washington, spending all this money, a delegation of 51 people traveling in a plane that could carry 250 people, but only 7 people were admitted at any of the meetings he went. So all the rest of the people were personnel and shoeshiners, basically. And going all the way there, not offering what's the new solution? What are you coming to propose? All they had to say in Washington, D.C., this delegation is, please continue giving us money because we would like to fight. For America, this fight is over. America has decided that they're leaving. They don't see the Taliban as an immediate danger to them. And so this whole message, the messaging of this trip was misplaced. And in fact, at the end of the trip, America repledged the same things they had pledged months ago. And nothing new except some COVID vaccines.
The 3 million COVID vaccines, the money that was talked about, that President Ghani talked about, had already been pledged. He's saying, Ambassador Kaju, so where do you see the situation going from here? What happens now? How are the Taliban looking at this visit? If Dr. Farhadi says, the Americans have given up their once darling President Ghani, then what happens next?
Well, I think they gave him up a long time ago. The Blinken letter was a clear manifestation of their exasperation with Ghani. Somehow they've been exasperated with Afghan presidents who were once their darlings. Dr. Farhadi will remember that Karzai was a darling, and then they got exasperated with Karzai too. But I think that's really not the significant point for me. This visit was not only a signal to Ghani, it was a signal to everyone that we are, and more importantly, a signal to Biden's signal to the US politicians who are very worried about the unfolding Afghan situation, that we are not abandoning Kabul. Don't think we are repeating 1989. But that's not the point at the moment. To me, the real point is what will happen on the ground, and the ground situation is bad. And second, as I mentioned, is there still a possibility of some talks leading to a new government, a unity government or an interim government? Now, I quite take
without Ghani?
Without Ghani. I quite take the point which Dr. Farhadi has made, and if this point is correct, that both the Taliban and the Kabul elite, not Ghani, but the Kabul elite, and I use that term deliberately because in that I consider everyone who's in Kabul, the old Mujahideen leaders, the new technocratic elite which came in the wake of 2001, the new boys who have come in, the new generation, and the political people who have emerged over the last 2 decades, if they've reached the conclusion that they cannot do business with the Taliban, then what is the path ahead? Then the path is confrontation. And in this, that path is lose-lose for everyone. Because in this, it is not the Washington visit of Ghani and Abdullah that I consider significant. Quite frankly, what I consider most significant is are the remarks which Austin and General Milley made to the Senate committee. I think it was these remarks were made on Thursday when they were asked, is there a short-term, medium-term, or immediate danger of international terrorist groups again consolidating themselves in Afghanistan? And both of them said there is a medium-term danger. And Milley added that if the government collapses and if the army dissolves, if the army dissolves, then there is danger. And I think the White House is being warned both by the Pentagon and the CIA that the withdrawal means that their present resources might not be sufficient to prevent that consolidation. And if that were to happen, last 1 second. If that were to happen, then the entire rationale for this 20 years of going to war in Afghanistan, the money that has been spent, the lives that have been lost would really would go away. And then what I have been arguing for years now, that America is not only in strategic retreat, but it is facing a strategic defeat in Afghanistan, would be established.
Why I was asking you to hold that thought so that you could elaborate on it is because I can play out that exact conversation that you're talking about. Senate Appropriations Committee, I think it was June 17th, when Lindsey Graham asked this question of both the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley. This is what they said.
The likelihood of international terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS regenerating inside of Afghanistan and presenting a threat to our homeland or our allies, given what you see today? Is it small, medium, large? How would you assess it?
I would assess it as medium. I would also say, Senator, that it would take possibly 2 years for them to develop that capability.
Fair enough. General Miller?
I concur with that, and I think that if certain other things happen, if there was a collapse of the government or a dissolution of the Afghan security forces, that risk would obviously increase. But right now, I'd say medium, and in about 2 years or so.
Okay.
Dr. Farhadi, the Americans are giving the justification to the world, and of course, more importantly to themselves, that Al-Qaeda is no longer a threat, at least from Afghanistan. But here you have two senior most, as Ambassador is pointing out there, in uniform, and your defense secretary saying that Al-Qaeda could be a threat within 2 years. So how do you read that?
Well, if the situation continues like this, Afghanistan will end up with ungoverned territories. That's where the problem is that there will be territories where the government of Kabul, even if it survives, will not have reach because the Taliban are cutting all the roads and communication roads by land. They destroy bridges, roads, etc. The purpose of this is for logistics on the ground not to be able to reach. And so far, the only way the central government has been able to send help to other provinces is with helicopters, and with the American withdrawal and the contractors' withdrawal, which is still being negotiated, the maintenance of the helicopters also is in question. So basically the capacity of the government to go and fight fights far away decreases very fast. In that case, in the large expanse of Afghanistan, there will be areas that are governed by narcotics dealers, by other people, by Taliban, and there's no guarantee that some other group wouldn't come and start activities in Afghanistan. Groups that are already there, but they have been sort of diminished. Al-Qaeda itself has a very old leadership. The new leadership is not there. So a lot of things have to happen for an Al-Qaeda to develop out of Afghanistan, but there are all kinds of other groups and negative activities that could generate trouble from Afghanistan. And in that case, this is why the Taliban, they are very smart in their strategic communication. They say, when we come, we will have a very strong central government and we will control all the territory. So they know what now the West really needs. It needs an Afghanistan where there is a strong control, peaceful, so that the refugees don't flow out to Iran, to Pakistan, to Central Asia. Last week, 137 Afghan soldiers had to take refuge in Tajikistan after Taliban, after Taliban took over Sherkhan Bandar, which they still have. So it's a situation where, yes, Afghanistan could become a troublemaker for the region. Everyone knows it, and the biggest risk is for Pakistan.
Biggest risk is for Pakistan. This is actually a question. Ambassador, is unstable Central Asia in the US's geopolitical tactic to contain Chinese expansion in the area? This is an argument that some analysts have put out, that all these groups could be possibly worrying or engaging the main adversaries of the US, which they've done in the past, like say whether it's China or whether it's Russia.
There is a logic to that argument, and that can't be denied. But I think the Americans are aware that if there is a consolidation of terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and maybe others, then there may be a threat to the American mainland as well. And that is exactly what Milley and Austin were telling the Senate committee, that if 2 years they can consolidate themselves, then with all their resources, and we know that while the Americans don't want a physical presence in Afghanistan anymore, they are desperately seeking a physical presence in the periphery, in the immediate neighborhood. And they are therefore, I think the Pentagon and the CIA is warning the American politicians that our hands are getting tied and don't expect miracles from us. So whereas this argument is a very seductive argument, that the groups there will pose dangers to the Chinese, ISIS, say ETIM to the Chinese, ISIS to the Russians. Then there are groups that are against Central Asian states, and I agree with Tariq completely that the TTP and ISIS in combination can give merry hell to the Pakistanis, so they must be very worried. I don't think they want, as I said, they don't want a repeat of the 1990s. Yet, I don't see a pathway. I saw a glimmer of hope in the pathway which Blinken was outlining. But that required the Taliban to soften their theological positions and a certain pragmatism on the part of the Kabul elite. Now, if that is not forthcoming, and if the Pakistanis are not pressured sufficiently to move the Taliban, because I think the Pakistanis, despite whatever they may say, they have enormous influence on the Taliban. But it is a unique Pakistani characteristic of never being able to look beyond their nose. And who knows it better than India? They think tactically. I think if you ask the Pakistani generals to think strategically and in the long term, they might make the right noises. But as a corporate body, they've always resisted that thought. Recently, Bajwa has been talking of geoeconomics. If that is the case, then Afghanistan will play a pivotal role for Pakistan's prosperity. And for that purpose, they need to push the Taliban to say that, look, you can't, the world will not accept what all that you did in the 1990s. You've got to have a more modern approach to your mazhab, to your theological positions, and Tariq would be able to answer that better than me. But I don't know whether the Pakistanis are doing it. So at the moment, as I said, there are imponderables. Perhaps I'm indulging in a little wishful thinking, hoping that the Pakistanis will see some reason, and they are playing a tactical game at the moment in letting the Taliban improve their military position on the ground. But if that is not so, then my feeling is that instead of the Chinese, the Russians, the EU, and Americans, and India too is affected, Pakistan coming together to see that how can we move this, gel it all together. Everyone will try to cut a separate deal to look after their individual interests. And in that, everyone will suffer.
This is how Dr. Farhadi also started off saying it's lose-lose. Dr. Farhadi, last question: what do you see the immediate future bringing in terms of the so-called peace process, the Taliban's military progress, even in the north, like you're pointing out, the Tajik border, and what is India's role? Because now there is talk that finally, not official, but that channels have been opened to the Taliban.
Oh, well, everybody feels, including India, that the Taliban will have some type of role in the governance of Afghanistan in the future. So contacts are being opened with them. And the group of Taliban that are in Doha, Qatar, especially Mullah Baradar, seems like a very soft-spoken person to any diplomat who meets them. But the Taliban on the ground are very different. They really come with a lot of violence. And even if Mullah Baradar is very soft-spoken to all the diplomats that visit him, it will be very very hard for him to control the field fighters. As it is now, very hard for Ghani to control all the warlords and the militias that he wants to build, and the chaos basically that is taking place when everyone takes a gun saying we will defend the country, but at the end they might use the gun against each other, and they might use the gun against the central government's army as well, once the fight becomes over resources. Because very soon everyone will see that Ghani is paying some militia leaders and is not paying some militia leaders the same way the $3 billion that Washington gives to pay the pay for soldiers, and it doesn't get to the soldiers, it gets to special interests. When militias start in Afghanistan, the militias will be paid differently, and once people feel that they are not paid the same, they will not stop. They will not fight for the central government. They will fight for resources, and the Taliban were going to use all of this. The Pakistani strategy right now is, without saying, they are not saying it, but they have fought for 20 years to arrive at this point we are right now. Basically, they want to put the central government in Afghanistan under maximum pressure. The Taliban, in the next few weeks and months, will continue this violence. The central government will come under maximum pressure. Some militia leaders and warlords will have to make truce with the Taliban when the fight comes to their area, and if they see that they won't be able to win the fight, and Ghani will not be able to airlift them logistical support or money. At that point, they will make deals with Taliban. I think Ambassador wants to say something.
Ambassador, yes, I'm leaving the best for last, possibly, because you've been talking about India and the Taliban for donkey's years now.
Well, I think Tariq is painting a very, very grim picture, and it reminds me of the 1990s situation coming back, except that technology now will make that situation, will make the Afghan situation far more lethal. And I had hoped that a peaceful chapter may begin with the process of reconciliation, but I cannot dismiss the view that Tariq is presenting. Perhaps this is the realistic view. So then, all that I will say is I am reminded of the title of Ahmad Rashid's book, Descent into Chaos. And if it is a descent into chaos, then every country will have to look after its own interests. And with narcotics, and this is something that Tariq mentioned, but we don't talk about it, because it's my belief that that Afghanistan is a platform for narcotics. And Tariq knows, he knows it better than me. He's been involved in Afghanistan's looking after the Afghan economy at one stage. That once the Golden Triangle, people who control the Golden Triangle shifted operations to Afghanistan, it is in their interest to continue the chaos. So if that is the situation, then I can only hope and pray that the major powers will come and wisdom will prevail despite their competition. And this is my last word. Often rivals realize that there are some dangers that are common and so very much of such a strong intensity that it is in their individual and interest to cooperate to eliminate them while their rivalry continues. But that doesn't seem to be happening. So we should all be prepared to look after our interests. And in that context, perhaps the more realistic element of my mind has been advocating since February of 2017 that India should talk to the Taliban. I know that perhaps I've lost a lot of very, very dear and old friends in Afghanistan for arguing this. The writing on the wall was clear, and the key lies in the Afghan army holding together. But if the Taliban start making advances on the ground, more than that they have over the last few weeks, and move rapidly, then there well may be panic setting in. And once panic sets in, then for any government, even a cohesive government, it becomes very difficult to control.
Ambassador Vivek, Dr. Tariq Farhadi, on that pessimistic note, let me end this discussion. And of course, we'll keep coming back to you for more as things go up. Sai Prasad Vishwanathan, thanking both our panelists, Dr. Farhadi and Ambassador Kaju, as is Stat News. Thanks, Ambassador, for your time and experience.
Pleasure.
And Dr. Farhadi, thank you as well. This is a topic that we'll continuously discuss as it unfolds. As the Ambassador said earlier, we don't even know what is actually around the corner. Dr. Farhadi.
Thank you very much for inviting me with Ambassador Kaju.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be with Tariq.
A reminder to our viewers, do subscribe to our YouTube channel and also get notified when we put up videos like this one by clicking on the bell icon. To follow our social media handles, that's on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you would like to help support us financially, you can do that. The link is there in the descriptor with the simple payment platforms that you can use. You've been watching Stat News Global. I'm Amit Abrevi.